This topic is what's the difference between experts and those with less confidence? As a coach, this is a very important question because you're trying to take people without a lot of confidence to more confidence. Or, maybe they're fairly advanced. You want to take them to seriously advanced. Well, what's the difference between these? A lot of times people talk about experience, like this person's had more experience. But notice that doesn't really tell you anything. A person can have more experience and not necessarily have more competence. Sometimes we might think of, well, a person's smarter than another person, but that's not true either. I've been in situations where I was definitely more competent than other people, but I wasn't smarter than them. I had just been there a while and I thought things through. So wasn't quite sure what the difference was. Experience isn't quite it. Intelligence isn't quite it. So what is it? That's really a good question. Now, it's kind of interesting that sometimes we say things that sound like they're an answer, but they're really not. Like I heard someone once say that scientists answer instinct when you ask, why do birds fly south for the winter? But all that really does is it sounds like it gives you an answer when it really doesn't. That's the same thing with experience or intelligence or things like that. So the question is, why is someone an expert and others aren't rather? Now you might get a clue if you think about a doctor and you go to a doctor's office and you get an X-ray. What'll happen is they'll show you the X-ray sometimes, or pretty much all the time. And when I look at it, I just see a lot of gray and white or black even, and it's like, okay, I'm glad you can tell something there. Whereas they see all sorts of interesting things because what they're looking at are what can be called distinctions. Like this fuzzy gray mass is distinct from this also fuzzy gray mass to me. But to him, there's a difference between them. And it's these distinctions that make a difference. For example, an expert carpenter knows the difference between cutting wood with the grain or across the grain. They not only can recognize the grain, that's a distinction, but what happens when you cut with or across? An expert snow skier uses differences in snow types. Like for me, I just see white snow or, maybe good snowball making snow and things like that. But I don't see that much difference between different kinds of powder or something. I might notice powder versus wet, but not like an expert skier sees. An expert small boat sailor will notice the difference between ripples on the waves and just the waves. They see more. Okay, and you can see this over and over again. Like a good bicyclist will know the difference between the front brake and the rear brake in terms of how they work. Front brake stops you quicker, can be actually dangerous because you can flip if you're going at a really high speed and you jam it down. There are different kinds of derailleurs, front and rear derailleurs, which change things. So, good agilists, let's take it into our domain, will understand the difference, say, between flow and time boxing, between an artifact that's releasable and one that isn't. So it's these distinctions enable us to see things differently, and that enables us to talk about them differently. Edgar Schein once said, we don't talk and think about what we see what we're able to think and talk about. So when we have distinctions, we notice them and then we can talk about them. And this is very important. So a expert will have things that they see that make a difference, and they'll also ignore things that they shouldn't be watching. Whereas someone who's less competent won't see things they should and may pay attention to a lot of differences they shouldn't. This is an important thing to recognize because if somebody says, oh, they see a difference between things, it's funny. I get a lot of times people saying, oh, there's no difference there. So you're actually arguing against learning something when that happens. Instead, it's better to say, I don't see a difference. Can you explain the difference to me? Can you explain why that difference is important? So a better way of learning is to be looking for these distinctions. And when you're coaching or teaching somebody, you might ask yourself, what are they not seeing that would be useful? What are they seeing that's not useful? You can often tell what's going on by just imagining, like, what would somebody be saying what would somebody be looking at rather to be saying this? And of course, you can ask them, well, what are you looking at? Why do you think these are the same? Or why do you think we need to do? Do you see any differences in these cases? So this is a good way to look at the problem is ask, what are people looking at? What are they not looking at? What are you looking at that they're not looking at? What are you not looking at that they're looking at? We'll get into this more and more about how to coach people. What are the distinctions? You should take a minute or two to think about this now. When you've been with people who are really effective, what are they looking at? What are they not looking at? When you've had troubles conveying things to people, what are they not seeing? What do you have troubles getting them to see? In the next topic, the pickup sticks model of creating curriculum, we'll actually discuss how you can use these distinctions and create a curriculum in order to explain things. Thanks. Hope you found this useful.